This is a treat, especially for me as a gun owner. This is somebody that I've been following for a long time. It's somebody I've been trying to get on this show for quite a while, but he is not an easy man to get a hold of. But today, we are joined by lawyer, legal commentator, and gun enthusiast Ian Runkle to speak about the liberal gun grab. Ian, welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Good
And
evening, sir.
yeah, sorry about the trouble on that because right now I'm like 1,000 emails deep. Just about everybody is trying to reach out and be like, "So, I need help with this gun ban." It's like,
All good.
okay, you and like every other Canadian. So I'm trying to get back to people, and it's like, sorry, it's
But I, I'm
chaos.
just happy. I'm just
Well,
happy
we,
you
we
made the
appreciate
time.
you
I'm
taking the
happy that
time.
you're there. Yep. And all I needed to do is to speak to the VPs at the NFA, to speak at the with the VPs at the CCFR, and then you paid attention. So that's all I needed to do is to talk to the two biggest lobby group in Canada for you to pay
that
attention.
that
But it's
isn't
okay.
actually what got my attention. It was just finally I looked in my because every so often like Twitter separates things out into like people versus, and so right now the people like the message requests is huge, but I looked at it and I was like, okay, what's this? And I was like, oh, let's answer this because yeah, um, it's just insane right now. I can't keep up. There's just so many people who are freaking out, and quite properly. People are going, "What should I do with this? How can I navigate this? Do I have any options?" And it doesn't help that the government is not being honest about what this involves. And so there's a whole lot of people who are just directly confused. And sometimes I'm fighting, like somebody sends me a thing and I respond and they're like, well, here's a politician saying this other thing. I'm like, yeah, that's not true though. You have to recognize that that's not actually what the law says. That's not what they're doing. So I mean, the big one is people going, oh well, is this voluntary? It's like, well, kind of. It's a little verbal sleight of hand because the voluntary part is, do you want to get paid? But the rest of it is not voluntary. Like the you have to give up your guns part is not voluntary. That is enforced with like tactical teams and shoot your dog and jail and all of those things that you don't want. So, it's like if somebody crashes into your car and then says, "Hey, do you want $500 for this or not?" That doesn't unfix your car, or like that doesn't uncrash your car if you say I'm not taking the money. It's so, but I get a lot of gun owners who have even been confused by that because they say, well, look, here's these politicians saying it's voluntary, and it's like, it is not voluntary. It is not at all voluntary. It is so it's just such a mess, such a headache, and quite frankly, I I can't imagine a worse way of doing this or a worse time to do it, but here we are.
It's definitely confusing for people because we've had again the two biggest lobby groups, the two biggest gun lobby groups on the show, and they get the ears and the voice of the people. They get to speak to them every single day. And as somebody that does journalism, that does a lot of research, I'm a one man team. Everything that I talk about is because I researched it myself, and I'm a gun owner as well. So I looked around, and I'm no legal expert. I'm not a lawyer. That's why I'm very happy that you're here, because there's a question that's been on my mind ever since this started, and everything that I can find seems to indicate that I'm actually correct. But you being here, you can confirm this. But basically, as it stands right now, as a legal gun owner, if you do not give up or disable what they now consider a prohibited firearm, let's say your AR-15, for example, by October 31st, 2026, we become paper criminals, and we could face up to 14 years in prison for possession knowing possession is unauthorized. Is that accurate?
Yep. I mean, effectively, it's basically, if you read like Cinderella as a kid, and at midnight, all of the coach turns into a pumpkin again, and all of those things. You should basically look at it as like your AR-15 at midnight on that day basically turns into a kilo of heroin. That's kind of the legalities of it. So, right now it is a prohibited item. It is banned. It has serious criminal penalties. And the only thing stopping the government from going after you is the amnesty order, which also means that if you step outside the amnesty order, like if you decided right now today to go to the range with your AR and just, shoot a few rounds, you could face that same penalty. So it's kind of crazy because there's going to be people who don't realize, especially with the government's messaging about like assault style weapons, but they keep expanding this list. So there's a lot of people. I have talked to gun owners who said, well, this doesn't affect me because I don't have an AR. And I go, well, what do you have? And there have been a fair number of people who start, well, I've got this, I've got that, I've got the other. And I'm like, and that's banned. And they go, what? So there's going to be a ton of people who don't apply by the deadline for the, to get any sort of compensation. And quite frankly, a lot of the people who apply for compensation are going to get ripped off. The government has made that very clear. But and they won't realize it even when the deadline expires. And so what might happen is some years later they're out hunting with a rifle that they've been using for 30 years for, hunting, and they run into a fish and wildlife officer, and the officer's like, hey, can I, check your tags? Can I, all of this, if you've run into a fish and wildlife officer, it's like, what are you hunting for? Okay, yep, that's in season. You've got tags, all good. But then they might go, wait a minute, that gun is illegal. And now you're getting arrested. And, I expect that for decades, I'll be getting calls going, so I didn't know this was banned. And it's a real problem because most of these guns were previously non-restricted, the lowest classification for firearms, and they were that way because a lot of the guns here that are targeted are firearms that were basically low impact in Canadian society. Most of the firearms on this list have never been used in a homicide in Canada. And if you narrow it down to legally owned versions, then the list of never used in a homicide gets almost to the entire list, basically. So these are not the guns that are used in, when you see a murder, happening on the news, it wasn't a gun off this list, almost certainly. What the Canadian gun experience basically falls into two categories for like criminal use of guns. And the first is like simple shotguns and hunting rifles that have been sawed down. And the other category is short-barreled handguns. And a ton of the guns that are seized off of Canadian streets, if you go downtown Toronto and you catch a drug dealer with a gun, tucked down the waistband, it is virtually certain that that gun is going to be a short-barreled handgun. And not just that, but one manufactured after short-barreled handguns were banned in Canada. So a gun that has never been legal in Canada, has never and could not possibly have lawfully entered Canada. These are the mainstay. So all of this, people are sort of looking at it going, well, I'm not the problem, but the government thinks they are. So, and they just keep expanding the list. It's, people who are doing sport shooting like myself, I used to do 3-gun with an AR. And then they banned that, and the public messaging was, well, you don't need an AR to do this. You can buy another gun. Go buy another gun. And we'll compensate you at some point down the road, but go buy another gun if you want to keep shooting in the meantime. So I did. And they banned it. And then they said, well, we're done banning. We're done. Go buy another one, And so I did. And they banned that too. And so every time we, like if you are a hunter or a sports shooter or anything, collectors are really getting hit by this. They, they're just like, well, okay, you went and bought another one, but we're going to ban that too. It's it's really quite yeah. And then they're concerned that like gun owners now. I saw some notes that the government is concerned that gun owners have sort of lost respect for the police. They went from one of the most pro-police, sort of groups within society to, gun owners who are just saying like, if I see a crime across the street and the cops want to talk to me, nah, I don't care. I'm not helping you out for any reason. It's people have lost confidence in the government to treat them fairly, especially with the so for the people who don't understand how the compensation is going to work, you have to sign up by, I think it's the end of March. I'm not paying
Yep.
too much attention because I'm not taking the
Yes.
money. But
March
if
30th
you,
or March 31st. Yes.
and then they have your list of what things you have and what things you're going to turn in and so forth. At that point, you are basically committed because if you don't turn them in, then they know you have them and they will come after you. And most of these guns, they don't know who's got them because they're all non-restricted, with the exception of like the AR-15. So at that point, they have said we've got a budget to seize a little over 100,000 guns. But the estimates are that there are 2 million affected firearms. And they've said, well, when we run out of money, we're going to pay people out on a first come, first served basis. And everyone else is going to lose their guns for nothing. We're not going to pay you a dime once we run out of the money. So there's going to be a lot of gun owners at the end
this is
of
obviously
this.
done intentionally, right? To ensure
absolutely.
that not everyone is going to be able to get paid to create a sense of panic, and or at least
they want to create urgency so that like you got to sign up now, because and what they're really hoping is that there'd be this huge number that they can release and be like, look, we've got 100,000 signups right away. But instead they got 20,000 signups, and that's 20,000 firearms, and it's not clear what all that includes. But so then they've, and then
before you continue,
also,
but before you continue though, because one of the things when I saw that buyback being brought together, and now they're talking about not having enough money for the 2 million guns, even though they're not even going to compensate you properly, even if you do get money for your gun. But it sounds to me just like a backdoor registry. They're fishing you with, oh, here's money, just tell us what you have, because technically they don't know.
That's exactly what it is. And in fact, at one point when Carney was speaking on the House of Commons floor, he did a Freudian slip. He used the word registry, and then he's like, compensation program. And it's pretty clear that in their briefing somebody used the word registry, and that caught on to him, because I don't think he was even in the country when the whole long gun registry, kerfuffle was going on. But that's another thing that they're trying to do here. If you remember, one of the criticisms of the long gun registry is that they said it's only going to cost like 20 million or whatever, and then the cost was like rolling up on like billions of dollars. And so they very much want to avoid any sort of budget overruns here. So the way they've done that is they've said, we're going to here's our budget. And every dollar that they spend on administration comes out of the pool and basically deducts from the compensation pool. So they're saying we're not going to go over the budget because we're just going to stop paying people. And, can you imagine if you tried to run your finances like this? Like you tell your bank, hey, I will pay the mortgage out of whatever's money is left on my paycheck. So, I mean, it really sucks for you that I went to the bar tonight because I spent $60, pounding down cocktails, and that's coming out of the mortgage payment, and nothing you could do about it. I mean, the bank has remedies. The bank would be like, we're taking your house. But the gun owners affected have no remedies. The gun owners affected are just like, the government can just say, sorry, we're not paying you, and there's nothing they can do. It's bizarre.
From a legal perspective, as somebody that does criminal law, because that's what you specialize in,
not allowed
why
to say
do you?
specialization with the Law Society, but it is an area of interest, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay,
But
one of the things that you do is criminal law.
yeah,
Why, in your lawyer's opinion, in your legal opinion, if you look at the statistics and you used Toronto earlier, across Canada, you're looking about 90% of the firearms that are used in crimes come from the US. They do not come from Canada. Some
yeah.
places a bit higher, some places a bit lower, but it's about 90% across Canada. So why are they going after gun owners? I know why they're going at it. I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I know the reason. But for you as a lawyer, why are they going after legal gun owners, considering that we are the safest people in Canada? My name's ran and your name is ran through two federal databases every single day to make sure I didn't commit a crime that could make me lose my firearms. I have less right than a convicted pedophile. Like the
It's
RCMP can legally, what is it, 24 to 48 hours? They can show up to my place and say, oh, we need to look at your guns. So why, explain to me why they're going after us instead of really trying to go after criminals.
I would love to say that there's a good like criminal justice reason. The thing is that these are not guns that are used in crimes. I have on a couple of occasions seen something like an AR or something at a drug dealer's house. I have not seen one used in like a crime. And the thing is that you get some drug dealers kind of are like weapons hoarders. So you get some of them that have like all sorts of things from like morning stars and nunchucks to whatever else. Sometimes, but that doesn't mean that that's what they're using. What criminals, and when I'm talking about criminals, I don't mean like somebody who's accidentally committed a crime or whatever else. I mean people whose occupation is crime. Like they're what they do for money, what they the really dedicated criminals who are this sort of danger in society, and they want concealable. They want portable. Because if you're sitting there out at a street corner selling drugs, a gun that is, you're sitting there with this big long gun,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
takes no time for the police to roll up on
Not
that,
gonna,
right?
yeah,
They want something that they
not
can
gonna
tuck
fly.
into a jacket, that they can tuck into their pants. And so that's why you see the short barreled handguns, not even like the big long, the long barreled guns that, people are using in competitions and like long barreled handguns. And you see like sawed off shotguns, sawed off rifles that are like cut down to be real small. And the guns they've targeted are ones that often don't make a whole lot of sense. Like nobody saws off an AR, like you just don't.
Yeah.
They're not the sort of gun that you do that with. People are sawing off like 12 gauges. So none of this makes any sense in terms of like what you see from criminals. It's just not the ordinary course of things. So, it's when you find people who've been killed in, some sort of homicide, they are typically, it's typically 9mm, not 223.
Yeah.
And, and 22, a lot more 22 and 12 gauge than 223. So all of this, it just doesn't make any sense from that perspective. But I mean, if we're getting into the theorizing and so forth, gun owners are a group that typically does not vote liberal. So they can punish that group and not take any blowback from their voters. But also, there's a lot of people who are left leaning who really like seeing people who are perceived to be a right leaning group punished. And
Yep,
there's a lot of
you're right.
stereotyping. You'll see the number of times I've heard left wing people say things like, why do you need a gun? Doesn't your dick work? Which is itself incredibly sexist, but it conveys a very hostile attitude towards gun owners. And the funny thing about that is that the gun owners are, they're people who do sport shooting, they're people who go hunting, and a ton of them are Indigenous Canadians. This is going to weigh on Indigenous Canadians in a big way. So you get people who are like, we need to deal with the overrepresentation of Indigenous Canadians in prisons by jailing a bunch of them for their hunting rifles that they've like gotten from their grandfathers. And so I'm like going, this makes no sense to me. But that animosity, it plays well to people in, Quebec, people in, Toronto. And this isn't even a conspiracy theory, because we actually got this directly from Gary Ananda Sangari, who was caught on tape going, yeah, we're doing this because, Quebec. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And he said, like, I can't defend this on safety. I can't, make this make sense, but we have to do it for Quebec. They know it's not a public safety thing.
Before I throw it to Rob, because I know he has something to say, I just wanted to kind of input on something you said earlier. And I come from a criminal background. I'll be the first one to admit I've sold drugs. I've done a lot of bad stuff when I was younger. And they're not hoarders. Drug dealers are not hoarders. They're like pawn shops. You accept any type of payment for what you're selling. So often you end up with some really weird shit just because that's all the fiend had to offer when they needed their fix. Just
some of the, especially the ones on meth, there's a meth hoarding sort of correlation. And so you get them, like, some of them will collect weird stuff. Some of them it's payments and so forth, but some of them it's just they have weird collections of things. And it's not always like weapons. Sometimes they have weird collections of like other stuff, but it's a whole thing. The if you're talking to like the opiate dealers and so forth, they don't tend to have that same thing. They'll move.
It's only the meth guys.
Yeah.
Rob, I know you have a question, so go ahead.
I've got a couple. Yeah, I've actually got two, Ian. I'll just ask them first and then throw them to you. The first is about you had mentioned that a lot of these gun owners are now sort of really becoming maybe not anti-cop, but not as supportive of the police as they have been. Now, I'm only mildly versed in this issue, but just from the outside, it did seem like a lot of the police forces were not cooperating with this. And I was wondering what your sort of, if that's how the average gun owner, do they see that in that way, or do they actually still blame the police forces? So that's the first question. And the second is, you had said you can't think of a good reason why they're doing this gun grab. But can you give us like the real reason? And actually, I thought of this before. You actually did just answer it a few minutes ago with the basically because Quebec said so, right? It's all politics.
Yeah, although the timing is also interesting of these announcements, because they keep announcing more gun bans every time there's a scandal with the Liberal government. And so something happens that is embarrassing, and they're starting to get heat, and then we're banning a whole bunch of guns. And suddenly the news isn't talking about the embarrassing thing, they're talking about the gun ban. And initially we saw with the Portapique shooting, the ban was dropped like the next day, which means that list was already compiled. Like they had that ready to go. That was not something that, because it takes them a while to draft anything. That was just like immediate.
Oh yeah.
And it didn't look like it was something that was like hastily thrown together or anything. That was ready to go. And there were a lot of issues with regards to that shooting in terms of the police behavior. Why did they not go after this guy, notwithstanding the fact that they had multiple reports of him having illegal guns? What about the police shooting at a fire hall? These sorts of things. And all of those questions just evaporated in a puff of smoke because suddenly people are talking about the gun ban. So what could have been a major, why did the police screw up this bad, turned into, well, we've just banned a whole bunch of these things. But, and sorry, your other question, I've forgotten it now.
Well, I'll reintroduce it for you by naming the people, if you don't mind, Rob, because I wanted to ask him that. No, so Alberta, Ontario, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador. Yukon, Manitoba, New Brunswick, the Northwest Territories are all saying that they're not going to enforce it. Literally, you have Quebec and BC, and Quebec will probably change because we do have an election this year, and the party, the Parti Québécois, that's winning in the polls is pro-gun, and they're separatists on top of that. So maybe that Quebec's not even going to be in the equation, but there's probably at least 20 to 30 different police forces throughout Canada that said we're not doing it.
And there's two real factors on that. The first is this program is going to be expensive, and it's going to be an operational nightmare. And you've got all these police forces going, okay, it's like if you're at work and somebody goes and says, who wants to do a whole bunch of extra work for no extra money and no extra credit? And you're like, ooh,
with
me,
extra risk
right?
too, right? Because this is
But,
a high risk thing, going door to door to take guns.
Oh, I mean, if they're going door to door to take guns, that's insane. I don't think they're going to have any problems in most areas, but you know, I mean, there's places where that might be a risky move.
Oh yeah.
And I know that there are a couple of reserves that have basically told the police, if you come here to collect guns, you will find them all lined up against you with a big go home sign. Because, I mean, we have had, you know, if you look at Oka, there was Indigenous resistance. And the only reason that's not a golf course right now is because they lined up with firearms and said, nah, we're not doing that. I can't see them wanting to do it on that basis, but even just things like, you know, the collection is going to be a hassle. They got to protect this because, okay, you've collected a warehouse full of guns. Now, how do you keep anybody from stealing it? Because one of the sources of, you know, firearms on the street is stolen from cops. So, you know, it's basically, do you want to take all this on for no extra budget, no extra whatever? And they're like, we're not interested. But the other factor is that a ton of the people who own ARs are police.
Exactly.
So back when ARs were legal at the range, if you saw somebody at the range rocking an AR and, you know, putting holes in paper, there was about a 50-50 shot that was a police officer.
Yep. 100%.
And, you know, you'd go up and you'd talk to them and it's like, oh yeah, I'm with EPS, I'm with whatever. And the reason why is because you get a lot of them who are either on a tactical team or want to someday be on a tactical team, or now that a lot of forces are rolling out ARs just as general things, they're like, I want to practice. And for a lot of forces, their practice time is like, okay, you get 100 rounds a year. Okay, that sounds like a lot if you've never gone shooting, but I will go through more than 100 rounds on a range trip. And,
Jesus.
you know, so, you know, if you want to be proficient, and especially if you want to be proficient, you know, under high stress, difficult scenarios, because it's one thing, you know, when I got into doing 3-gun, one of the things I learned is that it's a very different thing between like, okay, I'm lining up on a target, I'm taking a nice shot, you know, all of that, to there's the timer, beep, and now you got to do it under time pressure and, you know, be accurate while moving, be accurate under speed. Even just a really simple thing, you know, if you know, go out to the range with your rifle, take some shots, and then run for like 15 minutes and then come back and try to take those same shots. And you're going to be all over the map. And that's without even doing things like, you know, if you were doing push-ups, you'd be even worse. I did like brutality matches in the States, and one of the stages had you carrying a like a police riot shield and then shooting one-handed, and my arms were sufficiently tired that the gun wasn't cycling properly because I was limp wristing the gun because my arm was exhausted. These are the kinds of things you never think about. You never actually consider until you're doing this, which is why a lot of police were really keen on these things, because it allows them to train and practice. And, you know, when you see situations, here in Edmonton, I think it was last year, we had a case where the police were shooting at somebody. Apparently, they had reason to, but they shot into an apartment building and killed the occupant. Some guy was just sitting there frying some eggs, and a bullet came through his window. I am much happier if that police officer has good aim and those rounds are landing in their target versus bad aim. There was a similar case in Edmonton where they there was a child that was killed because they were firing at a guy in a vehicle. And again, ultimately they were cleared on that. It was determined that they had good reason to fire at the driver, but you miss the driver and that bullet goes somewhere. So all of these police officers who bought ARs to practice with them still have the ARs. And so I think it's a very difficult question for these police departments going, are we going to raid those cops? Like, are we going to, it'd be a very awkward conversation with the going door to door to the other, to other officers and being like, yeah, you have to give up your guns. It's going to be, this is going to be a disaster. And I don't know how to fix it.
Well, I don't think you can. I think this is a good thing that a lot of those police officers do like ARs just the way we do. I'm very happy about the news that we're hearing that they're not going to enforce it. And clearly there's a moral aspect behind it, but they can use the fact, hide behind, oh, we don't have the money to do this. So we can't possibly do that. But at the end of the day, how many of them have really a big moral problem saying we don't want to do that, to target the people that are not the problem? But one of the questions that we got a question for the audience, and I really like that question. Sylvie's asking, do you know what happens to those confiscated firearms? Because that is something that's not very clear in their buyback program either.
So the initial round was taken from businesses, and those businesses, they sent their guns to a property that is leased by CZ, Colt Canada. CZ owns Colt Canada. So that's where those ones went. But I've heard from reliable sources that CZ is backed out, or Colt Canada is backed out. They're not doing it anymore. Within Quebec police, the Sûreté de Quebec is destroying the Quebec guns. It's not clear if they're destroying all the guns or just the Quebec guns. So it's unclear what's going to happen with all of these. But if you're in Quebec, you know that they're going to, the Quebec police. But for somebody, say, in British Columbia, it's not clear where they're going. And I mean, it may end up being a giant mess because if they end up doing things like they've been talking about mobile collection units, well, all right, if they're mobile collection and destruction units, like if they just have a guy with a chop saw in the back, then you can end up with real problems of accounting, because what will likely happen is you'll get somebody who turns in their AR-15 and the government says, we never got your AR. And they'll say, well, I gave you my AR. And the government will say, we don't have it. We don't believe you. We are going to send a tactical team to raid your house. And people may end up getting charged for, basically paperwork, errors. Somebody types a serial number in wrong. It's the number of places this is likely to go wrong is huge. So
yeah, and bureaucrats always do something wrong. Can't trust them to do anything right. Now, before we let you go, because we're 8:00, I wanted to ask you one more, because as a lawyer, obviously you get a lot of messages. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of gun owners that are approaching you to try to understand what their options are. What can you do legally as a lawyer? What do you recommend legally to the people that are getting in touch with you that do not want to give their guns away, that do not want to turn them into paperweight either? They don't want to destroy their firearms. What do you tell them to do right now as we speak?
I mean, right now you can hold off because there's, it's until October. But the thing is there aren't a lot of good options. Some of these guns might be able to be sold overseas, elsewhere, but the biggest market is the United States, and the United States has very strict rules on imports. So a lot of these guns, for instance, cannot be sent to the US. There's other countries where some guns might be able to be sent and other guns might not. So, but the export thing is complicated. It's a bit of a nightmare. There are a few film armors who might be able to buy some of the guns, but the CFO and the registrar are, in my view, illegally trying to prevent that from happening because they're trying to ensure that nobody can, and I have a film armorer's license. They've told me, oh, you can't buy any of these guns. And I'm like, oh, we might have a court fight about that because I will be absolutely down to fight with you about that. There, of course, there's the government options. If you don't want to break the law, and of course, I can't advise anybody to break the law, but if you don't want to break the law, but you also want to annoy the government, one of the things you can do is you are allowed to destroy a gun on your own. When you destroy a prohibited or restricted firearm, and all of these affected guns are now prohibited guns, you are required to report the destruction, but you're not required to prove it. You're not required to provide them with the parts. You're not required to anything. And so this is going to annoy the hell out of them if it happens in any significant numbers, because you might get gun owners going, yes, here's my AR, and here's the serial number, and I destroyed it. And they'll say, prove it. And you say, no, I don't have to. At which point they have a problem because, now the one thing you should definitely not do is don't report it destroyed if it's not destroyed, because the false report is itself a crime. And if they ever find that gun anywhere and you reported it destroyed, you're going to be in a world of shit. But, if you actually destroy it, you don't have to prove that to them, and you don't have to give them the parts. You don't have to anything. At which point they're going to be like, how do we know these things got destroyed? And let's imagine there's like 1,000 ARs that are destroyed and then reported, but no proof. They're going to be going, ew. And it's so it's a way to annoy them. And I mean, I'm a big proponent of annoying bad governments when they're doing, because there's all sorts of ways to protest something legally that will annoy them. And so some of those things that I'm planning to do, I can't really say here because it'll cause trouble. But I mean, I've got this thing. This is a spoiler because there will be a video about this thing at some point. I've got big plans for that thing. So that I don't want to say.
Obviously,
No,
he just
that's
said
the
he
secret.
won't tell you.
No.
I will.
But-
There's going to be a video, and it's going to be me doing a bit of trolling. But yeah, so the problem is for most people, the options are not good, in terms of following the law. And it's an unfortunate circumstance. I've had people call me up with regards to the handgun transfer ban. And they're like, look, this gun has been in our family for, for generations. One of my relatives brought this back from World War II, like a World War II captured Luger. This was because, this relative who was injured in battle and, was covered in medals and so forth. He brought this back. And how do I give this to my kid? And the answer before used to be easy. Like, here's how you do that. No problem. We'll get that done for you, in a weekend. No issues. Now, the answer is you can't. And like, I've had people crying on the phone when they realized that they couldn't get their family heirloom. Like, grown men just crying because their dad just passed and the gun that they thought they were going to get that has this huge family significance has to get destroyed. And, I hate those calls, but, you take those calls and do what you can, which is usually to say, I'm sorry, there's not a good option. And I mean, this is the problem, is that for the people who are not affected by this, they say, what's the big deal? Right? I see people on Reddit and so forth all the time saying, oh, just buy another gun. It's no big deal. Well, okay, but that's not a good answer for a lot of the people who are affected by this. And they don't realize just how much animosity and how much division this is creating. And I said earlier, like, this is the worst possible time to be doing this. Right now, we've got the whole 51st state thing and so forth. The government should be going, we need to have people unified. And instead, they're pushing this incredibly divisive policy that pushes urban against rural, that pushes, all sorts of people away, and especially annoys and offends Indigenous groups, the military, and police. And I'm going, now is the time you want to pick a fight with the military and the cops? Are you kidding me? Whose side are you on? Even more so when you have the Canadian Armed Forces is going, well, our defense strategy is armed civilian resistance. And the government is like, okay, we're going to disarm the public. And I go, what? Why are you taking steps that actively undermine the Canadian Armed Forces planned strategy? And I know that if it was the Conservatives taking steps to undermine the military's plan, you would have people like shouting treason from the rooftops. But instead they're like, oh yeah, we're all for it. And it's because politics is this huge team sport. And it's hard not to buy into the team sport thing when one team is like actively trying to screw with my life and the things that I enjoy and all of those things. But I mean, it's just so frustrating and so mind-boggling at all of this. Because, I mean, if I was in power right now and the Canadian Armed Forces was like, we need armed civilian resistance, I'd be like, we encourage all Canadians who are eligible for a firearms license to get one. And we encourage you to buy, buy an AR. We're taking those off the banned list. We're taking everything off the banned list. And also, we are going to ask Canadian Armed Forces trainers to spend one day a week at their local range, just providing training for anyone who wants to show up and learn. That's where I'd be going. Just come on out, learn to do this. We hope nobody ever needs to use it, but learn how. And instead, they're like, we want to disarm the public as much as possible, and it's not public safety. The things that they do in the name of votes, I just go, okay. So this policy could end up being viewed in hindsight as incredibly divisive and disastrous. So,
especially considering that gun owners are extremely political.
Yeah, well, that's part of why they want to target gun owners. It's, the Liberal Party has always been very forward-thinking. They think 10, 20 years out, and they have identified gun owners as a group that doesn't like them. And so if they can eliminate gun owners, and before these bans, gun ownership was growing, especially with things like 3-gun. And especially the fastest growing group of gun owners was women.
Yep.
And if you're looking at what, when I have brought women out to the range, just okay, they're like, I want to learn to shoot. I bring a variety of guns. And the one they always gravitated to is I really enjoy shooting this.
AR.
The AR-15.
But it makes sense when you think about it because it's so adaptable. I'm 6'1", 230. My wife is 5'4", 120 pounds. We can use the exact same gun and it will be operated in a very similar fashion for her and I. That's one of the beauties of the AR-15.
It's a small cartridge, so, you've got people who might be smaller framed and they're not getting beat up by recoil. They can focus on shooting accurately. without having to worry about all of these other things. So, like the number of women who were buying ARs just up to the ban was a lot. And it was, you know, that was the fastest growing segment of like the shooting sports was women. And it's also one of the few sports where women compete equally against the guys. Like if you go and run a 3-gun match, it's not men's 3-gun and women's 3-gun, you know, at least, you know, where I am, it's just 3-gun. And a lot of women outshoot the guys. So yeah, all of this I feel is, you know, there is some political aspect of like, if we can eliminate this voting block, that that'll help us out in future. And I feel like that's what they're trying to do.
I think there's a bigger agenda at hand, but you're still a lawyer, and I understand that you need to be careful about what you say. So I'm not going to go there, but I really appreciate your time, Ian. Thank you for accepting my invitation of coming on the show. Hopefully we get you again, because
sorry it took a while.
I'm very I won't stop asking.
that was great.
Like I kept on asking and asking and asking, and that's what I'm going to continue doing. So now I have your email address, so I know where to send the email. But I definitely like to have you back on as the story develops, because this is not any way close to being finished. So thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. Thank you for the work that you do educating gun owners and educating the people that don't know about guns in Canada. So thank you very much for what you do, Ian.
Thank you. And I really like this format where you've got sort of a left-leaning and a right-leaning person having a dialogue, because I think that's really important. You've got so many spaces online that are just like all left or all right, and it just ends up being people listening to themselves. And we need more of like reaching across things. So
I appreciate that you could recognize who the Liberal was. Thank you for knowing who the Liberal was. Yeah. But thanks a lot for your time, Ian.
That's basically what we were. Yeah, that's basically what we designed the show to do. So yeah, we appreciate the kind words, and thank you for the conversation. That was a great chat. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much, and cheers.
Thank you, Ian.